Yeah, we are on air. Dr. Srijan, you can take over.
Okay, thank you, sir. Very good evening to all. Thank you, Captain Manoj, for uh, joining us today. For the introductory words, I welcome our coordinator, Dr. Shafiq. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 13 of Surgical Musings brought to you by ASI Kerala chapter. Now, to decrease errors and adverse events and to increase teamwork and communication in surgery, a rather unique tool was introduced in 2007 by the World Health Organization, which we all know as a surgical safety checklist, which subsequently has brought about a paradigm shift in patient safety, improving morbidity and mortality worldwide. Despite its positive overall impact, surgical never events continue to persist despite the surgical safety checklist. This is also a well-known factor. There are several probable reasons to this, and that has been researched in detail. Variable implementation seems to lie at the heart of it. And in looking for answers, personally, I have felt that we should look back or try to learn again from the industry which actually inspired this whole concept, which is the aviation industry. What I have found is that, and read also, is that the aviation industry has much better engagement with their safety checklists than us surgeons, and that could be one of the reasons why the outcomes vary. Anyway, we have a real life hero as our speaker today to enlighten us more on this. And without much ado, I invite our chairman, Dr. Srijan sir, to introduce the speaker and start proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Shafiq. Shafiq is actually busy with his get-together programs, but I never wanted to miss him today. So I asked him, please join for 5 minutes and then you can move away. So first of all, I express my sincere gratitude to Captain Manoj Ramawarrier for accepting our invitation and to find some time to share his knowledge and experiences to the surgeons. A warm welcome to you to this forum, and I welcome all those who are listening to this program. The jobs of a pilot and a surgeon share some similarities, but they also have distinct differences due to nature of their respective professions. With over 20 years of flying a commercial aircraft, Captain Manoj has successfully navigated countless flights across the globe, demonstrating unwavering precision, exceptional decision-making skills, and unwavering commitment to the safety. As a highly respected figure in the aviation industry, he has earned the trust and admiration of his colleagues and passengers alike. Captain Manoj is from Trichur, and he is the head of operations and admin of the Airline Pilot Association of India. He is the senior commander of Air India Express. He has an experience of more than 11,000 hours of flying, and he was with Jet Airways for 15 years. And since 2019, he is flying Boeing 737-800 Air India Express, currently based at Calicut and flying to the Gulf countries. I know him for the last 3 decades because we are involved in amateur radio operations, or commonly known as ham radio. And while the fields of aviation and surgery differ in their specific domains, both professions demand a commitment to the excellence, attention to detail, and the ability to perform under pressure. The ultimate goal of both pilots and surgeons is to ensure the safety and well-being of those under their care. He has some real, very interesting life experiences. At least some of you must have watched the film Runway 34, which is based on a real interesting, thrilling incident where the hero of is Captain Manoj in the real cockpit, but in the film it is Ajay Devgan. I think it's better to listen from him directly at some stages of his talk today about what exactly is a breathtaking event. I don't want to detail it. And let us extend a warm welcome to Captain Manoj Ramawarrier as we eagerly anticipate his enlightening and inspiring talk. We are privileged to have him here today, and we are confident that his words will resonate deeply with each and every one of us. Thank you, Captain Manoj, and over to you for your speech. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Srijain and Dr. Shafiq. Good evening to all, and thanks for the very kind words and for the nice introduction. And first of all, I hope I am audible to everyone. And if at some point, if somebody has any issues with the audio or any issues, or if you want to post a question, please, I'll try to monitor the chat box. And I've, in case if I miss, if you see something, please do let me know so that we can, as we go, we can make sure that all the questions are answered as early as possible. Without much further ado, I'll just start off with the presentation. As briefed earlier, I'm Captain Manoj Ramawarrier. I'm basically from Kerala, born in Thrissur, and currently flying with Air India Express. I'm flying the Boeing 737-800 aircrafts now as a commander, senior commander. And as Dr. Srijain said, we know each other for almost 3 decades. And while having a discussion about the surgical musings, which was very interesting, he mentioned that he wanted to have a talk on aviation. So I was not very sure, how much we share in common. But then when I started doing a little bit of research, I realized we have quite a lot in common, because both the industries, if I can call it as an industry, I wouldn't want to call medicine as an industry, but aviation definitely is an industry. So both have very close ties, and very, as was put by Dr. Shafiq, we learn from each other, and from experiences, past experiences, as well as we love technology, and we try to introduce as much technology as possible, and to reduce the errors and associated issues which can arise from that. So the talk, basically, I wanted to put it as learnings from aviation industry, or finding parallels between aviation and surgery. And a very nice, interesting topic was put forward, which was the sterile cockpit. So I'm sure, that is some term, one particular term, which is very important, and which is used in both the industries. So about me, born in 1975 in Thrissur, Kerala. I did my school in a place called Ullur, and then college education was in Irinjalakuda Christ College. And 1993, around 92, I think I saw one ad in the newspaper, which mentioned there is some flying training institute in Trivandrum. So went to Trivandrum and got myself enrolled in a flying course, and finished my commercial pilot course in 1997. So at that time, only government flying institutes were there, and the job opportunity was pretty much limited to just Air India and Indian Airlines. And this was not a great time to probably pass out, because when we had a few private airlines which had started off, and many of them were shutting down at that time. I'm sure many of you would have traveled by East-West, Damania, NEPC, and Modi Luft and all. So these were some of the airlines which shut down at that point. So I came out with a commercial pilot license when the industry was not ready to take anyone. So had some technical interest during that time. So went on to do some computer course and associated some work. And in fact, was involved in a little bit of medical equipment servicing also at that time, along with a friend of mine. So we used to repair the C-arms and the X-ray machines at that time. I'm sure you would have used the Philips BV25, if I'm not mistaken, and some lithotripsy machines and also. These were some of the machines we used to repair at that time, and all the computer related stuff I used to do, even though I'm not formally educated in computers. We had some very close friends who were ready to guide us, and that helped me to get some experience in that. And towards 2002, the field started opening up, and I joined a company in Bangalore. It's called Agni Aerosports. And they were manufacturing some microlights, small airplanes, two-seater airplanes. And the job was to test fly those airplanes and then deliver it to the people who have ordered them. A very small airplane, about 450 kgs. You can just barely put a small bag and put some fuel and then fly. So, and the same company had some very interesting tie-up with an American company called Weather Modification Inc. And during 2003 and 4, we used to do the so-called weather modification, or it's commonly known as what do you call that, cloud seeding. It's supposed to be like seeding the clouds to make some rain, and that was in 2003 and 4 during that time. So I used to fly some airplanes which were specifically designed to go into the clouds and generate some rain, artificial rain, so which is being done even now also. 2004 end, got recruited into Jet Airways. I was there from 2005 to 2019, and thereafter 2019 the Jet Airways went down. At that time joined Air India Express, and I'm with them from 2019 onwards. Some of the airplanes I have flown, to start off with the very basic ones, started my flying in Cessna and Pushpaks in Trivandrum. Thereafter went on to fly the slightly bigger one, Cessna 180, Piper Cheyenne, which is a twin engine airplane with the weather modification aircraft, and Islander BN2A, which is again a twin engine airplane. And for the commercial aviation, I started flying the 737-800 as a co-pilot, and moved on to Airbus 330. And for my command, which is the pilot and command endorsement, I came down to the 737-800 again, and been flying in command from 2010 onwards. We also have a small association of airline pilots. It's called ALPA India, Association of Airline Pilots in India. And I'm a committee member of ALPA India from 2018 onwards. It's purely a welfare-based organization, and it is based in Bangalore. And I help them with all their admin and operations work, especially the websites and all that, with a little bit of background on the computers. I help them with all the administrative work and support. So I wouldn't want to make it as a talk. I would rather have it as a discussion, because I have very little to talk from my side in terms of I can tell you a few things about aviation, but I more than discussions, I have a lot of questions as well. So because a lot of these things, like, since we have a lot in common, I'm sure, like, we can make it as interactive as possible and keep it very interesting. So we will try to find some topics and try to find some parallels between surgery and aviation, how these two, the lines, there are some places where the lines merge. And during the research, I found that, like, we have too many places where it is joining, and there are a lot of learnings happening from both sides, and it is mutually beneficial for both the fields. So how we learn from each other, and then we'll discuss some real life scenarios and some past incidents where some of these principles were put into use, and how certain scenarios were, like, circumvented. So we call it like joy of flight. Together we can make it, because it's all a teamwork. Definitely, like, I'm sure, like, nowadays, even any field, if you see, it is all teamwork. And we talk about resource management and such things. And a lot of discussion and research has been happening in those fields. So parallels between surgery and aviation, the human factor, that's something which is the human factor is like something which is like very, very important, even though it is like a skill-based a job. When humans are involved, where of course, in your case, definitely you are working on humans as well. We are working on machines. So, but then the aspect of the human factor, because end of the day, we are just not only pilots or doctors. We are, I mean, running a house. We have friends. We have issues at home. We have like deal with 101 other things while working. So all this, even the temperature in the room affects our mood and like how we react and all that. So there has been a lot of studies which have gone into this, and some of the books, very interesting books, which I have seen is like one is, I'm sure many of you would have seen that book. It's called Naked Ape. It's by David Beatley. And the same author has written a book called Naked Pilot. So the Naked Ape analyzes the human factors of like, how the humans react to different situations and the psychology behind our actions. And the same thing treatment he has given and written a book on human resources, that is Cockpit resources, human resources in flying, that is called Naked Pilot. So it analyzes the pilot and how certain actions of the pilots, why it is happening and how it is happening and all that. So it is something which is like very interesting read. And if you see the both the fields, both fields requires skills. It's all acquired skills because we are being trained to do certain things, and we do this on a regular basis. Like, we are trained for this, the acquired skills, and then focus of the individual is required, and extensive training is required for and using the state-of-the-art technology. So if you see, like, we are all trained to do our basic work. Like, we get a commercial pilot license after our initial training, and I'm sure doctors get their MBBS. And thereafter, we go on to our specialization. I'm sure you have taken surgery, and thereafter you would have gone through different courses, and you would have been trained in some specialities, which makes you a very skilled surgeon. All this is acquired skills, even though there are a lot of skills which are there, attention to detail and like some motor skills which are required. And usually it is considered the pilot, we need the basic skill, but at the same time with a very basic motor skills and the knowledge, we should be able to be trained to become a safe pilot. So I'm sure like we can find a parallel there. That is the skill required, the focus required, and the training which is being imparted to us to become a surgeon or a pilot. That is one parallel I could find. Other one is like, it's all a teamwork nowadays. We work as a team. So from starting from the place where we do the basic paperwork, it's called a dispatch or an operations department. We go there, we meet our team members. Usually we deal with a team which keeps changing every day. So I'll be a pilot in command, and I'll have a co-pilot with me whom I've never met probably before, with whom I'll be flying for the first time. And I'll have a set of cabin crew, some of them whom I have not seen also. And there will be the operations department staff who will give us the papers and required details. And then you have all the engineering staff and the ground staff. Everybody is like involved in the safe operations. So in your case, for surgery also, I think like you have a similar kind of a setup, but probably with more team members whom you are familiar with sometimes. And in our case also, we get familiar crew sets, but it's very rare. So resource management is like very, very important, and teamwork is, as I'm sure, like, you have very, very clear areas of responsibilities and what everybody is supposed to do. Yeah, I'm seeing some points in the chat. Yeah, about anesthesia. Yes, it's more parallel to flying. Okay, induction, takeoff, maintaining cruising, and getting the patient back from anesthesia. Most difficult part, landing the plane. Yeah. So if you start thinking about these two fields, I'm sure, like, there is more to it. Like, the more and more similarities we can see. And the co-pilot does have independent actions. We have a cockpit system wherein, like, I'll come back to this in a moment. The co-pilot and the pilot or the captain, we have a very clear area of responsibilities. And we have something called a system wherein, like, we designate one pilot as pilot flying and the other pilot as pilot monitoring or pilot not flying. So basically, the way in which it is done is like, suppose I am the pilot flying, I'll be doing my set of actions, and which is very clearly defined and mentioned in the manuals. So we go as per that. And the other person, he will be the pilot monitoring. So basically, the pilot flying will be in charge of the flight path control, flight path management. Then any actions which needs to be done for that, that will be my primary responsibility. And the pilot not flying or the pilot monitoring will, of course, monitor me. If I'm doing the right actions, then he will be doing the navigation part and the communication part as well with the ATC. So it is not strictly captain and co-pilot, because the captain can be pilot monitoring and the co-pilot can be pilot flying. The way in which usually the airline flying is done is like, if you are flying two sectors, for example, say Bombay, Delhi, Bombay. Bombay, Delhi is usually done by one person, and the return sector is operated by the other person. And sometimes both sectors are done by the junior crew for more experience. Sometimes it's done by the same captain if the weather is bad or if there is any adverse, any other issues, like you have turbulence, you have like strong winds or any other issues, then probably the captain will do the flying. Considered captain is usually having more experience, so he is considered to be having the better probably skill sets to make a safe landing. So that's about the questions what you have posted. And you cannot allow a passenger in the cockpit during flying, which means when we say flying, we say chocks off to chocks on. So those small triangular, the blocks are called the chocks. So we keep it at the aircraft wheels to ensure the aircraft doesn't move. So the moment the chocks are removed and the aircraft starts moving under its own power, then it's called chocks off. That means the flight is started. And thereafter, when the aircraft comes to the bay, the engines are shut down and they put these blocks right next to the wheel. That's called chocks on, which means like the flight is ended. So between these two, events, it is considered the aircraft is in flight. So at that time, no passengers allowed. But at the same time, on ground, if the passenger wants to see the cockpit or something before the flight, we generally encourage that. Even I've seen a lot of kids are interested to come and see the cockpit and what's happening inside. So we definitely encourage that. And can you have this syringe and needle in the cabin baggage? That is more to do with the DGR. I'm sure, like, it can be done, provided you have a use case scenario wherein, like, you have a doctor's certificate or something. And so that's something which is probably it can be done, because we have a first aid kit and a physician's kit on board. So which has all these, the syringe and needle and like different medicines. So it's all available in the aircraft. And if there is a doctor with a patient who has a requirement, we definitely will allow that. And that is one of the structure case patients. We do that. We carry a sister and a trained sister and a doctor also sometimes with the required equipments. So yes, it's somewhat akin to you don't allow bystanders to enter the theater, similar to that. So basically, the idea is there are two things. Number one, in your case, I'm sure you want to keep it as sterile as possible. And in our case, it's also a sterile cockpit, sterile environment, but that is more to do with avoiding any distractions which can happen during the operation of the flight. I'm sure you would have seen a lot of news articles or you would have seen recently in the media, someone allowed the friend into the cockpit during the flight and someone made a complaint and all that. It's as per the rule, it is not required. But long back, I'm sure many of you would have traveled in the cockpit yourself. So at that time, the rules were a little more relaxed and we never had those lockdown system, which was there before, which was not there before the 9/11. After 9/11, we started having those doors and the lockdown system. Turbulence, yes, we can find out from the charts. When I said we come to dispatch and then get the papers, so that will have our flight plans, our which will have all the details about the expected turbulence and the weather, what is expected on our route. And from that, we can deduce some of the, seeing some of these parameters, we can say that, yes, we can expect some turbulence on this route. And there will be some particular seasons wherein you have very strong winds over a certain areas of our route. And we can predict that during this time of the year, we can expect some turbulence. So that is something which you can expect to see in the papers. And then you can, based on that, when we generally make a passenger announcement, we say that flying time is this much, about 4 hours. And after about 45 minutes, we are expecting to encounter some light to moderate turbulence because of so-and-so reason. And those kind of details can be given. It may not be exact, but we can give an approximate time and the encounter. We try to avoid as much as possible those kind of situations because the cabin, I'm sure there'll be some service going on. We would want the passengers to have maximum time with their services. And if they want to use the washrooms or something, we would like to avoid as much turbulence as possible. But sometimes in clear air also, we encounter some turbulence, which is called CAT, clear air turbulence, which cannot be predicted, which cannot be seen on the, which can be predicted, but cannot be seen on a weather radar. So that's something which, can happen. And yes, I'm sure some of you have traveled in the cockpit. So coming back to this teamwork, team consists of members. So usually why do we have these resource management and the studies and all? If you actually look at it, we have in the team, we have people from different countries sometimes because we have expat pilots as well, different countries, different race, different backgrounds, and different languages and different thought process, that kind of a set of people. So unless you have a proper coordination, we wouldn't be able to, fulfill the goal what we have, which is a safe conduct of that flight. So we have a resource management study which is conducted, and we have a training for the crew, and we are strictly trained to, do things in a particular order. I'll come to that in a short while in one of those subsequent slides. We call it scan flow, which basically means we have panels in the cockpit and we are supposed to go through the panels in a particular flow. And once we have the flow done, after that, we do something called a checklist. So then basically that's something which we use to make sure that everybody is doing the right thing. And no, it's fine. You can ask because the thing is basically I am expecting some inputs from you as well, so I can cover some of those inputs which Dr. Rajan has been putting in. Those kind of inputs will be helpful for me to take the talk in a slightly different way also. So I have planned something, but then that can be expanded to fit into your requirements also. So no issues. Please keep the points coming. That will be interesting always. So we have something called standard operating procedures. I'm sure you also have something similar to that. I don't know the exact word for that in medicine, but I'm sure you will have something like that. We have for everything, we have something written down. We have an operations manual. We'll have a set of circulars, and our regulator is DGCA, Director General of Civil Aviation. They come up with recommendations, the recommended and standard and recommended practices. We have the international body, which is the ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. They come up with similar kind of recommendations, based on which our national regulator, DGCA, comes up with our own set of Indian rules. And then the company for which we are flying, or it can be airline, or it can be a small corporate setup also with just one airplane. They also have a set of standard operating procedures. Idea is to enlist what all we will do in different circumstances, so that everybody knows what is expected of them if they encounter a particular situation. So sterile environment or a sterile cockpit is also a part of this. I'll come to detail about sterile cockpit and the requirement for that. I'm sure as surgeons, you know how important a sterile environment is. The same way we also go through a sterile cockpit procedure, which is to ensure safe conduct of flight. Then once we go through all this scan flows, we do checklists. So checklists are done so that just to ensure that we have not missed out a very key thing during the procedure, which can result in the probably in an unsafe situation for the flight. And while going through the details of it, Dr. Srijayan pointed out that WHO also has a checklist, a surgery checklist, which was very interesting. And I was going through that, and I'm sure that is something which probably medicine has probably taken from our environment, which is the aviation environment. And yes, you have also the SOP, and yeah, terminologies. You can see quite a lot of things in common. And I was quite surprised to see something like for training the pilots and other crew, we use something called competency-based training and assessment and evidence-based training and all. So I was quite surprised to see similar terminologies are used in medicine also these days, and even for any other educational, all fields, the training and education, like initial training as well as the continued training, they use these kind of terminologies, which are very common now. So checklists, we use checklists for everything. Yes. And it is usually done. That's the last point at which we can probably trap an error. So for example, during pre-flight, we are supposed to switch on a particular fuel pump. So during scan flow, the person who's responsible for that would have switched it on. And then during checklist, the way in which checklist is done is like one person calls for the checklist. Usually the pilot flying or the captain calls for the checklist. The pilot monitoring will carry out the actions first, which is called the scan flow, and then do the checklist. While the checklist is being done, what we do is, like in this case, like in my example, I've said like the fuel pump is switched on. So the pilot monitoring will say fuel pump switched on or on. Then the other person, the pilot flying, will just verify that it is, yes, it is switched on, and then he will acknowledge it. Some of the very critical items like before takeoff checklist and the before landing, usually the landing checklist, those things we usually go with a challenge response kind of action, wherein one person will challenge, say, for example, in this case, like landing gear, which is a very important thing. So the pilot monitoring will say landing gear. The other person will look at the landing gear and make sure it is done down, and then he will say down. So if it is not down, then that means like you have not done the flow properly. You will correct that and do the checklist again. So checklist is the last point at which you can trap an error. And usually we have seen, we follow the system wherein, like, we use the Swiss cheese model in resource management, wherein you have layers of cheese and you have the holes. And sometimes these holes align in such a way that, like, you can see, you can actually draw a line through them. So you can have different checks and measures, but at the same time, you can have a situation wherein all these combinations are aligned in such a way that you still have a line which you can draw through this. So that's called a Swiss cheese model. We try our level best, but the last point at which we can stop this is probably with the checklist. Of course, even checklist people have done wrong. By mistake, they have, instead of looking at the landing gear, they are continuing to fly, and they assume that, like, the other person has already checked it, so I don't have to look at it, and says landing gear down. And the other person just continues with the checklist, and the gear was not down, and the aircraft does a belly landing without the landing gear, which is a very dangerous situation. So these kind of things do happen, but that is the human factor element, which we are again trained to a certain extent to try and avoid as much as possible. So another thing which was quite interesting was that we use simulators for training, because as you might be knowing, like small airplanes, it's very easy to hire and then do training in that. But for a big airplane, which is costing 200 or 300 million, it is very difficult to keep the aircraft on ground for training purposes. And the hours and hours of experience or training which is required to bring the cadet pilot to a level which is required for safe operation of the airplane, it is probably not economical to do it on the airplane. So the manufacturers, what they do is, when they design an airplane, they design a simulator as well. And the simulators have come so far, and right now it has reached a stage where it is called a ZFTT, which means zero flight time trainer. Basically, if you fly the simulator, you will be able to just get into the airplane and just fly the airplane with zero conversion time. So it has reached a stage where, like, the technology is so good. We use very good projection technology for the visuals, and it exactly mimics the cockpit in all ways. And the sound, the feel you get, the motion you get, everything is exactly as per what you experience on the airplane. So we use simulators for training. So this is another field I saw that, like, you have simulators which can be used for surgery. So I've seen some of the videos, and yes, like video games, even the flight simulator, I'm sure like many of you would have played the flight simulator, started off with, I think, 95 or something, and then flight simulator 98, 2004 and all was there. And basically you can just fly the plane with your keyboard on the computer. Similar to that, a bigger unit is what we use for professional training, of course, with a lot of other feedback and better the display systems and all. So similar to that, I've seen like there are for surgery also, I've seen a lot of simulators or the games. You can say that it's like a game. So it is provided to improve your expertise. And I'm sure like a person who has done like 10 surgeries is better than one person who has done just one surgery. So similar to that, it may be something like which is probably not used that much like in aviation, but I'm sure like that is something which I'm sure like a person who has not done a particular surgery, if they want to be shown how it is done on a simulated kind of environment, that person will get a little bit of confidence, and then like probably with the guidance of the other senior surgeon, he can go and do it. So that's something which is like again a very similar kind of an use we have in aviation as well as in medicine. Of course, perfection, we train people and we check people on these simulators, because there is something which we cannot do. Yes, we cannot do on the airplane. On a real airplane, we can't test people for emergencies. We can't simulate an emergency like an engine malfunction or a failure or an engine fire or a smoke in the cabin or something like a total display failure. It is very difficult to show it on the actual aircraft. So what we do is like, and also how do you simulate heavy rains? Heavy rains, how do you train somebody for heavy rains? You cannot just say that like, just imagine that it's raining heavily, you just go and fly. We cannot do that. So we have simulated environment in which we can punch in some numbers and say it's the environment is like heavy rains, visibility is very poor. So then we can put the pilot onto the simulator and ask him to fly, and then like let him get the experience of what happens and how the airplane feels when it is flying through severe turbulence and heavy rains, and even through fog when the visibility is way below the normally expected minimas and all that. So that those kind of training can be done only on the simulators. And when you face with the situation, the actual real life situation, it is not exactly the same, but at least the crew is trained for something similar, so they can react in a much more perfect way, I would say. It's not the 100% the same situation which comes on the actual line flying, but something similar they would have seen before, and it's very easy for them to adapt to that. And the startle factor is like very less. Startle factor is something which we call like, the time it takes for a person to notice an event and then understand what exactly it is, what malfunction it is, and then to react to that. So the time it takes for the person to recognize a malfunction and then address it becomes much lesser. Maybe a few seconds it will take. If the person is not trained, it will take probably 10 or 15 minutes. So that can be reduced. Another thing which I've seen is like, I don't know how much it is being used in medicine, but I'm sure like, the medicine is also doing this, incident reporting and learnings from the past. So we come across something called the just culture. Earlier, it used to be all blame culture. Basically, if there is a problem, the patient died, then it's a medical negligence. Or if the aircraft is there is a crash or an accident, then it is pilot error. So that used to be called a blame culture. And what we are trying to do is like we are moving into a system wherein it is called a just culture, wherein we are trying to encourage people to report any incidents, any of their experiences which they come across, or even the mistakes they do. Suppose like one person did a mistake and nothing happened, no accident happened, no unwanted or unsafe situation occurred, but it could have led to an unsafe situation if there was another thing also, like one more thing had happened, So if the crew or the person identifies that as a threat, he will report it to the company. And the department, there is a department for that. We have a safety management system and all that. So the department will collect or collate all this data and then come up with some recommendations which will avoid getting into such situations. So it is considered, and it is a requirement also, regulatory requirement also now for us to go through this training and try and implement this online on our day-to-day activities. In the medicine field also, I've seen like some, I've been reading about it. We have, yes, you have discussions wherein like, if there was a mistake or we try to probably, or you try to probably go through your actions, what you did during this particular situation or a surgery, and then you will probably have a discussion on how it could have been done better, or how some certain things can be like done in a very different way. So that is similar to aviation also. I don't think it is used extensively like in aviation. Like right now in aviation, it is being used very extensively. And we are surviving because of that, because like the one catastrophic accident or mistake or mistake which can lead to an accident, it is, no company can afford something like that. So these are some of the parallels I've seen. And yes, Dr. Bijoy, the incident reporting is called DATIX. Okay, there is a separate team to manage it in each hospital. Yeah, I've been seeing, I've been reading about it in some of the online. Yes, somebody's trying to speak, please. Anyone want to say something?
Please carry on.
Yeah, okay, fine, no problem. So if there is anything, please, on any of these topics, if you had like, something to say, please, either you can use the chat box or you can tell me.
How many minutes you have seen the deceleration?
Sorry?
This is code compression because our AFI is only 2.
Okay, I think it's probably something.
Here AFI, Liker is very low, 2 only, 2 to 3. You will expect only that during.
Okay. So,
Excuse me, madam, who has logged in with the name SU? Please mute you. Please mute yourself, madam. Somebody had logged in with the name SU. Yeah, microphone is on. Please mute yourself.
Thank you.
that was definitely not something I could have answered. So I'll skip that question actually. So we have seen something called a sterile flight deck and the sterile cockpit. Okay, I'll go ahead with that if there are no questions, like, in whatever we have discussed so far. So this is something which is like, similar to some similar terminology which is being used in flight deck as well as in the medicine field of medicine. In the aviation field, we have identified the requirement for avoiding distractions in the critical phases of flight. So when we say critical phases of flight, it is usually when probably when the takeoff roll is started and the aircraft reaches a safe altitude of, say, approximately 10,000 feet. So only those activities which are required for the safe operation of aircraft may be carried out by the flight crew, and non-essential activities are stopped. We don't talk about other things. We don't discuss anything. We discuss only those things which are required for conducting that flight at that time. So it is based on the legal framework from ICAO and DGCA, International Civil Aviation Organization, and the Director General of Civil Aviation. We have some operational circulars for that. And based on these operational circulars, each company will formulate a operations manual in which they would have listed out our procedure, the company's procedure. So that's usually, I'm sure, like, in the field of medicine, you will be using similar kind of terminology for a sterile, probably a surgical environment, because that is very important. So the reason why we have these is, like, there are few incidents which has happened. So one, I'll just go through it. This was in US. There was a ACE autopilot in emergency or when everything is smooth. Autopilot is something which we use to reduce our workload. We cannot do a takeoff with an autopilot, but we can do all the other phases of flight, including landing, if visibility is bad in certain airfields with the autopilot. But it cannot be done in a certain environments like heavy rains, severe gust, or like very strong winds, and in places where the instrument landing system is not available. When I say instrument landing system, ILS, which can do a auto land. And in India, there are only few fields which can do that, which is like Delhi, Calcutta, you can do, Bangalore, you can do. So only those places where you have like a history of having very low visibility during many days in a year, they install the system because it is expensive to maintain, and the training and other requirement, it is expensive to train the pilots also. So we have this kind of system in certain places, but in places like Calicut today morning, there was heavy fog and rain, and the visibility was below the minima required, and the aircrafts were being diverted to Cochin, Coimbatore and all. So here we can't do, in Calicut, we can't do a auto land. So only a manual landing can be done. So takeoff is never done with automation. It's only with the manual takeoff. That is primarily because there is something called a decision to be made. During the takeoff, you have to decide whether you can continue the takeoff or you have to abort the takeoff. If it is an unsafe situation, like an engine fire or something, we are better off dealing with it on ground, trying to stop the airplane on the ground, on the runway, rather than taking off. So there are decisions are taken by the humans still. And even in landing, we take the decision of whether to land or to abort the landing. So certain things can be done with the autopilot. Many of the things, it reduces the workload, keeps the pilot fresh, and make sure that the pilot is fresh for those critical phases of flight, which is probably the last 5 minutes or the first 5 minutes of your flight. So a lot of similarities, takeoff and landing of an aircraft. And yes, okay, right. Yeah. So when you think about it, I'm sure you have a better understanding of your field. And when I list out these things, I'm sure you will be able to draw some parallels between these two topics. So coming to this particular incident, it was in US. It had it was doing a non-precision approach, which is not the ILS. It was being done with the so-called VOR and the DME, which is basically it gives you the VOR gives you the bearing and the DME gives you the distance. And it's called a non-precision approach because it's not very precise. It brings you down to a particular point above the runway, and there is probability that you will be able to see the runway or you may not see. If you don't see, you discontinue the approach. If you see the runway, you can go and land. So during this approach, the flight crew never had any sterile cockpit procedures at that time. And they were discussing other stuff like, the politics, used cars, and nation's economic uncertainty and all that. And 2 minutes prior to touchdown, the conversation switched to trying to identify a local amusement park that the aircraft had just passed. Shortly after receiving landing clearance, the captain remarked to his first officer, "Yeah, we are all ready. All we got to do is find the airport." Yeah, so that can be very difficult sometimes. 3 seconds later, the aircraft impacted terrain and shot off the runway, and 72 people were killed. So these kind of incidents in the past forced the regulators and the government to bring in some of these kind of rules like sterile cockpit and all, wherein the crew are trained for ensuring that the attention is drawn to only flying the airplane, or rather concentration is only inside the cockpit and not you are not discussing anything which is not essential for the conduct of the flight. Another example is Aeroflight 593, which was from Moscow to Hong Kong. And in this case, what happened was the captain's son or a daughter, I don't remember. The family was traveling with them and they wanted to come to the cockpit. So they entered the cockpit during cruise phase, and this Airbus 310, it had the kind of autopilot they had. It didn't have a alarm which alerted that the autopilot has disconnected. So the airplane was being flown on the autopilot, and the kid was on the controls. And while trying to, like, I mean, kids, like, when they try to drive or something, when they simulate this, they will do all this, like, I mean, and then he, in that process, disconnected the autopilot, which was not noticed by the captain and the co-pilot, and the aircraft went into an uncontrolled spiral, and it crashed, killing all the 63 passengers and 12 crew members on board. This, again, the reason was just a kid in the cockpit. So these kind of distractions and rules are, formulated so that these kind of events can be avoided. I'm sure in medicine you will have something similar. Some incident would have happened, and based on the learnings from that incident, the regulator comes up with a rule or a circular saying, in certain circumstances, these are the things to be followed. I'm sure, like, it's we are evolving the rules, and you will have something similar to say about in the aviation, I mean, in the medicine field of medicine as well. Coming to checklists, I was very surprised to find a checklist, surgical safety checklist. And I was comparing these two. Of course, it's not exactly the same, but you will know, like, similar to what you do for the surgery, we have something similar on the aircraft. So pre-flight, we do this scan flow, wherein we test everything, and thereafter the pilot calls for the pre-flight checklist. So just to show how it is done, I'll say, okay, pre-flight checklist. So the pilot monitoring will take the checklist and read, and all checklists are read and do. Nothing is done from memory, and this is strictly followed so that nothing is missed out. So the co-pilot or the pilot monitoring will call oxygen. The other person will say tested 100%. So we have tested it and kept it 100%, the knob position. Instrument transfer and display switches, then we'll check that and say, okay, normal and auto. Window heat on, pressurization mode selector auto, flight instruments set, parking brake set, engine start levers cut off. This will ensure the aircraft is ready to be started, and for the doors to be closed and the pushback to be done. And the next step, we do the before start so that the pumps are on and the doors are closed and all that. So each stage of the flight, you can see before start, and then before taxi, again, we do another checklist, and then we do a before takeoff checklist. Then immediately after takeoff, we make sure that we do the after takeoff checklist so that the vital actions while we are departing are all carried out, and aircraft is in a safe configuration to continue the climb. Then during cruise, there are no checklists, but we have some procedures which are not very critical. So that's why we don't have a checklist there. And for descent, again, we make sure that pressurization, like, is set for the landing. And then we recall some of the system lights, then auto brakes for the landing. Landing data, we will calculate the speeds for the landing, and the approach briefing. We have something called briefing. I'm sure that is another point which might have a similarity with medicine. Before every takeoff and every landing, we brief the other crew member. We tell them what is expected, what is the weather, and how we are going to use the automation, and how the landing is going to be carried out, whether it will be automatic, manual. If yes, what are the threats today? Today we have like fog and low clouds and light rains over the airfield. So we will use the automation as much as possible. Use of windshield wipers we will discuss. And we'll discuss in case if we don't have the runway in sight at so-and-so height, we'll do a missed approach. And this will be the procedure for the missed approach. And this is what I'm going to do. And after that, we will review the situation. We'll see how much fuel we have. And then depending on how much time we can hold, we will do a diversion. So this is usually a briefing. And for takeoff, we will discuss if an engine failure happens just before we get airborne, what is to be done for that. So it is very important that these kind of briefings are done. I'm sure for a surgery, as a team leader, probably you will be conducting a briefing saying this is the patient and this is what we are going to do for that. And this is the procedure to be done. And they probably you will discuss the role of each person, in the surgery room, and each person is supposed to do what, and in case of any eventuality, how you will go about it. I'm sure you have something similar to that. You can just throw some light on that. And for each and every phase of flight, you will have these kind of checklists. And till the time you secure the aircraft, we have a procedure for that. So that's something which I've seen. This is some picture. It may not be very representative of what you have seen. So I've seen some simulation programs for medicine, which is in your field for surgery and all. And we have something similar to what we have on the right side. That's the simulator in which the pilots are trained. You will see that there is a console in the back where the instructor sits, and he can simulate some emergency from there. And if you see on the right extreme, you have 2 seats, and the exact cockpit environment is, you have a replica there. And you can see that, every single thing which you see in a cockpit is given there. But at the same time, this is on ground, and you can probably simulate all kind of different scenarios you can simulate, and then train the pilot for handling such a situation. And yes, some of these airport air industry and airport activities. Yes. Is every communication in the cockpit monitored in the black box? Okay, when you say black box, there are 2 components to it. One is called the digital flight data recorder, which has every single thing which happens in the aircraft, but not the voice recording. Voice recording is in a separate module, which is called the cockpit voice recorder. And usually it will have about 2 hours of the last 2 hours of recording in that. So anything happens, -2 hours, you will have the recording of that. But the DFDR will have, it is just the data event. It is just a, polling happens every few seconds, and it takes a snapshot of the flight, what every switch, what position it is in, and what is the speed, altitude, all those details will be there in the DFDR. So that is there 100% monitoring, and it is being recorded. And cockpit voice recorder is recording only the last 2 hours of the flight from the event, if you see. Then for just culture, I was going through how it is used in your, in surgery as well. Just culture is generally an atmosphere of trust in which people are encouraged, even rewarded for providing essential safety-related information, but in which they are also clear about where the line must be drawn between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. I can't say that I've just by mistake, I've switched off one engine and the aircraft went into a spiral. I can't go back to the company and say that just culture, I have done this and this is what happened. That is not acceptable behavior. But if I miss out something and it was I feel that flight was safe, but at the same time, if that happens on another flight in a different situation, it can be unsafe. It should be reported. And then probably if it becomes a trend, 2 or 3 reports come in, then the company will identify it as a probably something which needs to be told to everyone and be alerted for. So framework is, it just ensures that there is a balanced accountability for both individuals and organizations responsible for designing and improving systems in the workplace. The second para is taken from one of the medicine websites, and where they were discussing something similar to a just culture, wherein they are taking inputs from people who are doing the surgery or doing a procedure and taking inputs from them. and trying to see if there is any change to be done, or is there any threat wherein like you will get into a stage where like it can have an adverse effect on a patient. So it's a pitfalls. I would attribute any of these errors basically to people. Basically, people make errors. Error can cause accidents in aviation or healthcare. Errors and accidents result in incidents in aviation, morbidity and adverse outcomes, and sometimes in accidents in aviation, mortality in medicine. So it's like you can just, this one sentence, you can put these, some of the words like, I mean, in a different way, and then you can just identify it with aviation or with medicine. The companies, the organizational approach has been to seek out errors and identify the responsible individual. Individual punishment follows. This is the old blame culture. This punitive approach does not solve the problem. People function within the system designed by an organization. An individual may be at fault, but frequently the system is also at fault. Punishing people without changing the system, it only perpetuates the problem rather than solving it. So everywhere in all fields, people have moved from the blame culture to the just culture. Maybe it is not termed so, but that has been the general way of doing it in how it is done. So I think with that, what I'll come to is like, first of all, I would like to since Dr. Srijayan said something about the incident, some real life incident. I'm sure like, you would have heard about one aircraft which was from Doha to Cochin, and there was some low visibility at Cochin. The aircraft diverted to Trivandrum instead of Bangalore for some reasons, and then thereafter reaching Trivandrum, it had a bad weather in Trivandrum as well, and the visibility was so low that aircraft had to do a very low visibility landing. So yes, that incident actually happened in quite some time back, 2015 it was, and the flight, in fact, if you go through that, there were 6 go rounds which were done, 3 in Cochin and 3 in Trivandrum, and unfortunately can't get into very detailed description of the events because of some limitations of the company and regulator and all that. But generally it was mainly, I would say it was a resource management issue, wherein while the aircraft was in Cochin, the aircraft had declared that will be diverting to Trivandrum in case if the approach is not successful, during which time the Trivandrum visibility had dropped. I'm sure like, people would have seen that movie as well. And then after that, this particular information was not passed on to the pilots. So the aircraft decided to divert and reach Trivandrum. And at that time, while starting to descend, the flight was told that the visibility is dropped now in Trivandrum as well. But by that time, the aircraft had run out of all other options. The fuel was so low to a certain extent where it was only available for like 30 minutes of flying. So the visibility was bad. And in fact, it was so bad that there was no visual of the runway till the last, the landing where the aircraft actually landed. So 3 rounds were done over Trivandrum. Runway was not seen. And then the last one, it is the last particular landing, the aircraft landed with about 300 kgs of fuel, which is probably good for maybe 6 to 7 minutes of flight. And it was a safe landing end of the day. And yes, that's the basic story of the movie Runway 34. And yes, I'm quite happy that the incident, whatever happened, it probably kind of we learned quite a lot. A lot of people learned from that incident, and was quite happy that the landing could have been made in a very safe manner. People spoke about heroism and all that, but having gone through a lot of things, I would say that heroism is not getting out of a situation like that. Heroism, I would say that, is not to get into such a situation. So with that, thank you very much for all your inputs. And is it safe to land in a sea? Yes, we call it ditching. I'm sure you would have seen the aircraft which landed in the Hudson River, the Captain Sully. Aircraft was perfectly safe, and the aircraft floated for some time. And one thing I would like to just point out is that the aircraft, the crew is trained to vacate or evacuate the passengers in a on land or in a ditching situation in sea within 90 seconds. In 1.5 minutes, all passengers can be taken out of that airplane using half the exits. Like if the aircraft is having 12 exits, even if only 6 exits are available, we will be able to evacuate the passengers. We are trained to evacuate the passengers in 90 seconds. So if the aircraft is floating for 5 minutes, that is more than enough for all the passengers to be evacuated, considering some startle effect, wherein passengers, if you tell them to get out, evacuate, they may be a little hesitant initially, especially if they see water outside, or maybe if they see some fire or something. The blind landing was not a blind landing, because you cannot land blind. It was just the way in which it was portrayed, because when we say we'll go blind, it doesn't mean we are going totally blind. Let's do it blindly, we say that in a very colloquial way. So some recording had something similar recorded in that, and that particular word or phrase was taken by the people who were writing the story, and then they just converted into a blind landing. So it was not a blind landing, but landing when the aircraft saw the runway at a very low altitude, let's say about 200 feet or 100 feet. So that's it. And I think we'll have some, I'll open it to any questions. And before I put it for questions, I was reading about some of the incidents, real life incidents in medicine as well. And one big thing I found out was we are much better off in aviation, because we are operating on the machines. And so aircrafts are machines and are much more predictable. Patients are humans, so not very predictable. So big kudos to you all for pulling out such amazing feats what you have done. And thank you very much for letting me in here, and to to have given me this opportunity to have this discussion. With that, I would like to open it up for any comments or any questions, either on the chat box or on the audio as well. Dr. Sri Jain.
Yeah, Manoj, it was a very interesting session. I think there can be a lot of questions. Madhu, you can carry on, please.
Yeah, thank you, Captain Manoj, for the fantastic session. And as you would have witnessed, there were a lot of questions in the chat box. And I think the first time that we're having this many questions in the chat box in between sessions, and the first time that the speaker is multitasking, probably a reflection of the kind of work you do in the cockpit, answering the questions from the chat box as well as carrying forward with you. And lastly, the last statement you made, that you deal with machines which are predictable. But I think we deal with human lives, but still the number of lives at risk if you go wrong is much, much more than what happens when we go wrong sometimes. And just for starting of discussion, have you heard of a person called Dr. Atul Gawande? he is a person who actually went into the errors, surgical errors happening in NHS. And then he wanted to correct it. And what he did was he went a lot into the aviation industry through his friends, spent a lot of time with the aviation industry and understood how the aviation industry brought down the complications or the errors. And that's how the checklist was transposed from aviation industry to our surgical industry, if you may call it. So subsequently, the WHO has taken up the checklist as a major initiative world over, saying that safe surgery saves lives. And that's how the checklist from the aviation industry started off into the medical industry.
I was not aware of the name of the doctor, but I was reading about how it evolved. And I'm sure, like, I mean, it's just, we all learn from each other. And it's just that, like, as you said, like, we are dealing with more humans, but yes, I'm sure, like, if you actually look at it, when you are flying an airplane or doing a surgery, we don't think about the patient, or like we don't think about who he is or she is and like how he is connected to certain people, or we forget all that. We just like do our job, which is like, we try to do it as perfect as possible. And we usually we try to do it with the best of our abilities. So that way it is both similar, but aircrafts are more, when I say predictable, it's a machine, so it is programmed to do certain things in a particular way unless there is a non-normal. But in case of patient, I'm sure it's the most complicated machine in this whole universe.
Absolutely.
So that way,
Absolutely.
I think, like, that hats off is required. So
Point taken.
And that's the reason for that. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, fine. Let me open up the session for questions from seniors. Rajan sir is there, Babu sir is there, Siddhikumar sir is there. Anybody, if you want to ask a question, please raise your hands, or you may ask questions into the microphone, please. Or Srijan sir, you may.
Srijan asked about
Rajan sir.
Srijan runway പറ്റി എന്തോ ഒരു ചോദ്യം ചോദിച്ചിരുന്നു തോന്നുന്നു.
No, that is the movie. Then there's the name of the movie, which was the story of the movie was taken from the incident in which Captain Manoj was involved directly.
I was asking Manoj, Captain Manoj, about in some way trained to tackle hijacking.
Yeah, we are all trained. So there is something similar which came in the chat box as well. If the cockpit is sterile, how come terrorists enter? So a sterile cockpit is maintained not for stopping the terrorists from entering. It is maintained sterile so that distractions don't happen. And terrorists don't care about distractions. If they have to come in, like, they will just use the guns or like, whatever is required, and they will just come in. It is just like similar to locking the gate of your home. You are putting a lock. So to stop whom? Like, maybe to someone like, who is like a just passerby, a curious passerby. But is it stopping a thief or to like, stopping him from entering the house? No, he will just climb the wall and like come inside. So terrorists, like, we can't stop with the sterile cockpit, but it is more done with certain other procedures, because we have lockdown measures. We have reinforced cockpit doors, and we have a policy of when to shut the door and when to open. And we have certain procedures. It's very clearly how we can, how we can let a person enter into the cockpit. For example, if the cabin crew have to come inside, they have use the either identify themselves, or sometimes we use a code. We use a access code for the crew to come inside. So they have to say that code, then only we will open the door. We have cameras installed so that we can see the whole that galley area. We call it the galley area, and we can assess the situation outside. We can make sure that it is locked and it is clear of any passengers, and then only we open the doors. And if you've seen, the pilots generally don't use the toilets in the back. This is to ensure that the pilots don't need to go through the passenger cabin where somebody can attack them. or like, I mean, hold on to them and like, I mean, try to use force. So unless the aircraft doesn't have a, toilet in the front, like, I mean, we generally avoid using the toilets at the back. We use only the toilets in the front. So these are certain procedures we use to ensure that there is no unsafe situation wherein like, some unwanted elements can take control of the airplane.
Coming back to the book that Atul Gawande has written, whenever we have new surgery residents join, we ask them to buy that book, read it, and understand how the checklist came into. The person who asked me to buy that book and read it before I start my surgical training was Professor Dayanda Babu. He's there in the audience. So, sir, would you like to ask something to Captain Manoj?
Thank you, Madhu. Atul Gawande is a great lesson for all of us. Of course, how he got inspired from the aviation industry regarding the checklist. But I'm sure that we don't have a comparison between aviation and human life. As you said correctly, exactly, human life is human life, and you cannot compare it with any machine, even though there are so many parallels regarding safety management. So that's the only thing I think which is we can compare with aviation. Otherwise, human beings, you cannot predict anything. How his vitals, everything will depend on the particular situation, which is totally unpredictable. Flight is not like that.
Yes. Thank you, doctor. Thank you. You're very right. And that's my understanding also, but I'm sure like, you will have like some. So while going through all this, like, it was a very interesting topic when Dr. Srijayan got this into my, I mean, like, we started discussing this. And initially we started with just one checklist. And then we realized like there are many things which are there, which are parallel. I would like to call it only parallel because it's similar. Parallel is like okay word, but you can't say that like, it's exactly like that. So we can't compare it that way, but surely like, we can learn from, each other.
Yeah, Manoj, we have two great cardiac surgeons who stop the machine in between and restart. Let us hear from Dagmar, sir.
Evident. See, I'm here. Thank you, Captain Manoj. It is a wonderful talk. And initially I was wondering, what is this about the sterile cockpit? Now I know what you meant. And probably, I mean, although all these, for all the surgery, what you said is important, it's more relevant to our specialty, mainly because when you go on bypass upon a cardiopulmonary bypass and going on bypass and coming off bypass, you always compare it with taking off of a plane and landing. It should be smooth, then only you'll have a smooth outcome. So, and the checklist, it's very important for that too, because if you go around a small thing also, you can cost the life of the patient. Whereas the rest of the surgery, even thoracic surgery, it's not like that. So this has got much more relevance in comparison to the aircraft, all these checklists and all what you said. And another thing is about the simulators. Simulators in, of course, cardiac surgery, in any surgery is also equally important because initial part, when you start doing, you may be already an experienced surgeon, something when the new things comes, simulator really helps. Incident reporting, very, very relevant, very, very relevant. And as you said, it's actually, it's not to find the faults, just to correct it, and what you have done for that, which is very important. I don't know how many people do that, but the incident reporting, which has become, I mean, recent of late, it has become more and more relevant because of the NABH. Then, see, even see emergencies which happens in cardiac surgery, in open heart surgery, like a leaking oxygenator, or suddenly the arterial line going away. All these things, we have some sort of a rehearsal prior to all these things. So when you start the program initially, so that they are not for every case, but at least initially, so that we are tuned to face the emergencies. Thank you very much for your
I'm so happy
talk.
that like you have gone through almost all the points, and like you took the you made the effort to like note down the points and like bring it up. Thank you very much. Thanks for your attention, and nice meeting you, sir.
Thank you.
So, sir, we are running short of time. It's almost 1.5 hours since we started this session. So before I wind up, I just, for the sake of those who are listening, there was a question regarding landing the flight in water. And Captain Manoj, you rightly said, Captain Sully. And for the information of those who are listening, there's a movie made based on that. The movie is called Sully. And Tom Hanks is the captain in that movie. It's an excellent movie. So if you have not watched that movie, I recommend watching that movie. It's an interesting movie where the flight is made to land on the Hudson River. Yes. So Srijan sir, any final comments or points before we wind up, because it's 10:30.
Yeah, okay, Manoj, it was a very interesting session, and we all enjoyed. And one thing which I would like to mention is, whenever I get on to the Jet Airways flight, in the cockpit door I have seen, and I was fascinated with that sentence which was written: "Flying is a serious profession. Do not carry your worries beyond this point." So I actually had put on the theater doors long back. So it was very interesting. Flying is a serious profession. Do not carry your worries beyond this point. It was a real interesting session, Manoj. Thank you very much. And next week, we are going to have in another 2 days, we are going to have this EME program at MES Medical College, Perindalmanna. And after that, on next Wednesday, we are going to have the talk by Dr. Patta Radhakrishna from Madras on making of the surgeon. For official vote of thanks, I hand it over to Dr. Madhu. Thank you, Manoj, once again.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you, Captain. It's a wonderful session. The longest session of musings till date, I believe, and a session with the longest discussions, I believe. And even I have at least a dozen more questions to ask, but I'll reserve it for some other day. So thank you for joining us and bringing us all the insights on what happens actually in your industry and how we have borrowed some aspects from your industry into ours. So thank you again for coming onto a forum where we surgeons have taken lots of message from your industry. I would like to thank all the senior faculty members and all the people who joined us for this wonderful session. Thank you very much. And Captain, you want to say something? You want to do something?
Nothing. Just I had just one slide to the end, which was like just a thank you slide with the number and the email address. So in case if I'm like hoping that this was like not too long drawn, and it was not beyond the expected timelines. But whenever discussion is involved, I'm sure there is a little bit of that chance of like the session getting extended beyond the planned timings. So I'm sorry if I've gone too long. And my number is with Dr. Srijan, email address as well as number. So if somebody wants to have like some clarification, discussion, anything, you're most welcome to call anytime. Message would be more appropriate because may be traveling. I would like to thank all of you, great surgeons of India, for letting me, giving me an opportunity to meet all of you and having a nice interactive discussion here. Thanks once again and good night.
Thank you, Captain. Thank you all and good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.